Those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chair,
Gentleman from New York.
I move for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6, Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York will be postponed. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I have a amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Garrett of New Jersey. Page 23, line 4, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $300 million. Page 24, line 18, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $32 million. Page 28, line 13, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $167,500,000. Page 32, line 4, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $500,000.
Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to consider the rest as read.
The gentleman asks unanimous consent. Without objection, reading will cease. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
And I thank the chairman. I ask my colleagues to rise with me in support for my amendment, which will save Americans over $500 million. My amendment before us today makes reasonable and targeted spending reductions in order to do what? Achieve significant savings that will contribute to our nation's fiscal health. You know, Mr. Chairman, we must really now step forward and take bold steps to reduce spending. And I do commend my colleague from the state of New Jersey for the hard work that he has put in, and I appreciate so many of the comments that he has already said on the floor, pointing out to the other side that in so many cases there is money in these accounts. The money hasn't been spent, and they have taken a serious look to try to rein in spending throughout the committee process. For they realize that our nation is on a path to bankruptcy, and we have maxed out our nation's credit card. And so while the committee did an admirable job in significant cuts in the underlying bill, I stand here myself, and the Republican Study Committee also believes that we can go further than this. And so this amendment is a very reasonable attempt at showing that this body is serious about cutting spending. You know, Mr. Chairman, for too long the federal government's energy programs have been sold to the American public as basically wise investments that will yield vast new technologies whose costs will basically pale in comparison to the benefits later on. But when you think about it, when you think about the billions and billions of dollars that we have spent year after year, our energy infrastructure remains largely the same in many respects. And we are still here today dependent upon foreign sources of oil, and energy prices, well, they just continue to spiral upward. Now, the other side talked about wise energy policy. Well, time and time again, federal energy programs have failed to live up to their potential. These federal programs have allowed the government to basically play venture capitalists, if you will, and they do so not with your own money, not at all. You do it with the taxpayer monies. And despite these little return on the investment, they have little choice to making these investments. The American taxpayers basically are commanded to increase this investment every year. For example, let's give out one since we've been here for a long time this evening. The American people are being asked by their government to invest literally millions of dollars to promote something called advanced solid-state lighting. What is that? It's a technology that even its supporters concede is far too expensive to compete in today's marketplace. So does this sound like something that an intelligent investor would do? I think not. But only members of Congress who are spending other people's money would do so. Mr. Chairman, the United States is home to the most vibrant marketplace of ideas and investors. And so the very best way for government to encourage energy innovation and revolutionary technology is to do what? Is to use that marketplace and get out of the way and allow private capital to make those investments. It is in the marketplace where private individuals will assess, well, the risks and the rewards, and they will invest responsibly with their own money on projects that will merit further development. So to conclude, considering the precarious state of our economy and our fiscal condition in this country, the government can no longer invest in some of these extremely risky and unproven projects without regard to loss and expense. Government can no longer play the role of that reckless investor. We must eliminate the waste where it exists and encourage the federal government to spend the American public money in a wise and prudent manner. And for that reason, I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to vote in favor of this amendment and fiscal responsibility. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And to speak in opposition.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
First of all, let me compliment my colleague and good friend from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett, and of course I'm reluctant because he's done his homework and he's worked hard, and I believe with him we need to reduce federal spending. We've been going over a financial precipice, but we on the Energy and Water Committee made a commitment. Of course, we were given a very low allocation, so we had to meet that. But we have cut energy and water back to approximately the 2006 level after multiple hearings. We have put into the bill more oversight. I believe we've made the tough choices. We've reviewed all accounts. We've put at the pinnacle, of course, our responsibility for national security, national defense, and in the weapons program and the nuclear navy, the next class of Ohio ballistic submarines. We've done what is, and also made substantial investments in the Army Corps of Engineers. But I'm reluctant to oppose this amendment, but I think we've made the tough choices, and I yield back and urge members to oppose his amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Chairman, move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
And rise also to join my chairman in opposition to the gentleman's amendment relative to, again, cutting back on what I think are very necessary investments in our economy as far as research, both as far as renewables, as far as fossil energy, as far as the science account. Gentleman mentioned advanced solid-state lighting. It is my understanding that Phillips has indicated that a small investment in manufacturing technology to improve the mechanisms as far as the construction and manufacture of these light bulbs would allow them to bring back jobs that are currently outsourced overseas. If we make that investment, and I hope we do, certainly would want to join with other of my colleagues to see if, in fact, Phillips Electronics is good to their word, but at this point simply would state my objection and yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. In the event of the chairs, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6, Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey will be postponed. Gentleman from Oregon, rise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Wu of Oregon, page 23, line 4. After the dollar amount, insert increase by $60,500,000. Page 32, line 4. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $60,500,000.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to urge my colleagues to support my common sense amendment to save consumers significant costs in heating and cooling their homes and businesses. I am joined by my colleagues Don Young of Alaska, Charles Bass of New Hampshire, and Paul Tonko of New York in this bipartisan common sense amendment. Now, it's important because buildings use more energy than either transportation or industry. Fully 40% of our energy is consumed by building systems and in homes. My friend Paul Tonko cited the figure that 70% of electricity in America is used in buildings. At a time of both record energy costs and record unemployment, we need to protect Americans from crushing energy costs by improving the efficiency of existing and new buildings and homes. It's not just an issue for cold weather regions like the state of one of my co-sponsors, Representative Young of Alaska. It's also an issue for hot climates like what we have here in Washington, D.C. Even at this late hour, at 8:30 p.m., you can just about hear the air conditioning straining to keep it cool in this chamber. The cost for air conditioning the U.S. Capitol is a fortune. It's also very costly at my 13-foot wide townhouse nearby the Capitol. And of course, heating cost is a big issue at my home in Oregon. The Building Technologies Program reduces the cost of operating homes and buildings by fostering public-private partnerships to develop technologies, techniques, and tools for making homes and businesses more affordable, productive, and efficient. According to the Department of Energy, the Building Technologies Program has resulted in fully $14 billion of direct savings to the consumer, savings that has been reinvested in local economies. Additionally, since its founding 20 years ago, the Building Technologies Program has saved the equivalent of over 12 billion gallons of gasoline. This amendment would return the Building Technologies Program to just its current fiscal year 2011 funding level. This amendment will cost nothing extra because it is fully offset by taking funds from the Office of the Secretary. According to the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee report, quote, a significant fraction of the funding directed in prior appropriations reports to specified energy efficiency and renewable energy activities has been diverted by department management to other purposes in recent years. In some cases, as much as 12% of the funding directed by the Congress for this activity has been diverted. The offset for this amendment will simply return the funds to the Building Technologies Program as intended by this Congress. This, my colleagues, is low-hanging fruit, and we should pick it. I want to thank my colleagues Don Young, Charles Bass, and Paul Tonko for their joint sponsorship. I urge passage of this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman must yield back his time. Gentleman yield. The gentleman cannot reserve. He must yield or keeps talking.
I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields the balance of his time. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to oppose the gentleman's amendment, but I give him credit for pursuing it. I have already noted that the bill reduces funds for energy efficiency and renewable that account because the government needs to live within its means and really because they don't need any additional funding. This amendment increases that account despite, as I said earlier, $9 billion in unspent stimulus money. But perhaps the amendment illustrates how there is simply no room to increase funding for this provision, as the amendment makes an unrealistic cut to departmental administration to do so. It's not responsible to cut administration and oversight, the very thing that both the ranking and I would suggest the Department of Energy needs more than anything. They need people to review their programs, provide accountability, meet the benchmarks we've set, the timetables we've set, and report back to our committee. So I oppose the amendment and urge others to do so as well.
Yield back. Gentleman yields back. Questions on the amendment for the gentleman from Oregon. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Recorded vote.
Gentleman needs to stand and make a...
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings of the amendment by the gentleman from Washington will be postponed. Oregon, excuse me, will be postponed. Gentleman from Georgia, rise.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment. Will the gentleman specify which amendment?
It's $200,000 into the spending reduction account.
Amendment number 200,000?
That's correct.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Woodall of Georgia, page 23, line 4, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $200,000. Page 62, line 2, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $200,000.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I realize $200,000 doesn't seem like a lot of money as we talk about millions and billions and then on to trillions. But, Mr. Chairman, when I got this press release from the Department of Energy dated May 24, 2011, it read this: the U.S. Department of Energy, together with the U.S. Department of Education, today announces the launch of a new energy education initiative, America's Home Energy Education Challenge, to educate America's youth about the benefits of energy efficiency. Now, Mr. Chairman, you know as I do, this committee has been asked to make tough decisions about how to allocate money in this appropriations bill, and has done an amazing job in doing that. And yet, what we continue to see out of agencies from downtown is the creation of new programs. Now, you know as I know that we could go through and eliminate, we could zero out this entire appropriations bill, and we wouldn't be anywhere close to balance. We could zero out all the discretionary spending, wouldn't be close to balance. And I wonder if folks downtown are getting that same message. Now more than ever is not the right time to start a new program for which there is no demand and bring that to the American people. Now, Mr. Chairman, I grew up before there was a Department of Energy. And believe it or not, this program is targeted at folks in grades 3 to 8. When I was in elementary school, we had an energy efficiency program. There's a sign on the wall that said, please turn out the lights when you leave. There was another room in my younger days that had a bird, and the light came right out through the beak. The switch came right out through the beak that said, tweak the beak when you leave. Lots of those things are going on in America's classrooms, Mr. Chairman. They don't need to originate from Washington, D.C. They don't need the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Energy to get involved training children to turn out the lights. We've heard from speaker after speaker after speaker who's trying to move dollars around to make sure that we're targeting our few dollars that we have at those critical cutting-edge technology programs, those critical research programs, those critical infrastructure programs, and yet here we have a brand new program, Mr. Chairman, going to teach children to turn out the lights when they leave. I think that's a wonderful goal, and I hope parents across America who are watching this tonight, Mr. Speaker, will take this as their push to go and begin that program at home if they haven't already. Knowing how tight dollars are in my community, I'm sure families are already doing that. But this is a serious issue that requires folks across the board to come together to make the kinds of spending decisions that we have to make to dig ourselves out of this hole, creating new programs to do something that our state responsibilities, local responsibilities, family responsibilities. This is not the time nor the bill for it, Mr. Chairman, and I urge my colleagues to support this amendment to cut these $200,000 and eliminate this new program, put these dollars in the spending reduction account before the new school year begins. And I thank the Chairman. Yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
And to speak in support of the gentleman from Georgia's amendment. He is so articulate, Mr. Speaker, so convincing that we're willing to accept his amendment.
Yield?
Be happy to yield.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. I want to thank the gentleman from Georgia for providing us with a copy of the amendment ahead of time and would join in the chairman in accepting the amendment.
And one of the convincing arguments of the fact that you made reference to the Department of Energy newsletter, a new program where maybe personal responsibility should be perhaps ahead of what they may suggest. So, yield back.
Questions on the amendment by the gentleman from offered by the gentleman from Georgia. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment. Will the gentleman specify which amendment?
So the amendment relating to solar energy, $166 million.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. McClintock of California, page 23, line 4. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $166,143,000. Page 62, line 2. After the dollar amount, insert increased by $166,143,000.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment saves $166 million by relieving taxpayers of having to subsidize yet another year of handouts to the solar industry. Solar power is not some fragile new technology. Photovoltaic electricity generation was invented by Edmund Bescarel in 1839, more than 170 years ago. And in more than 170 years of continuing research and development and technological advancement, not to mention untold billions of taxpayer subsidies,
We have not yet invented a more expensive way to generate electricity. Yet we're perfectly comfortable telling our constituents that we're taking another $166 million from their families this year to throw at this 19th century technology for no particular reason other than it makes us feel good. Not only is this the most expensive way we've ever invented to generate electricity, it also adds nothing to our baseline power. Our electricity systems operate on an integrated grid, meaning we have to constantly match the power going onto the grid with the power coming off the grid. And since there's no way to predict when a cloud passing over a solar array will immediately drop the output to zero, we have to construct an equal amount of reliable conventional power to back it up at a moment's notice. So in other words, for every kilowatt of solar power we add to the grid, we also have to pay to add an additional kilowatt of backup power. If this technology was truly on the verge of a breakthrough, it would be the hottest thing in the stock market right now, and investors would be tripping over themselves to get a piece of the action. They are not. And we have no right to take our constituents' money and put it into yet another losing proposition. Well, we're told the solar industry is making great strides in the marketplace, lots of new jobs. Well, that's true. But it's making those strides not on its own merit, but solely because we are hiding its true costs from consumers through massive tax subsidies that in turn we're borrowing from the Chinese. It's true that if you hand over $166 million of taxpayer money to certain solar corporations, well, those corporations are going to do very well financially. But their government-funded windfall comes at the expense not only of the hardworking Americans who are the source of this largesse, it comes at the expense of our ability to generate the most energy for the lowest price. Perhaps it's just human nature that the more we invest in our mistakes, the less willing we are to admit them. But with the mistakes of the last 30 years now contributing to the bankruptcy of our country and the impoverishment of our people, perhaps it's time to tell not only the solar industry, but every part of the energy sector, get off the public dole, compete on your own merit, and restore to consumers the accurate and unadulterated price signals that they need to make rational decisions in the marketplace. I yield back.
Gentleman from Indiana.
Chairman would move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
And rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment for reasons I have stated on other very similar amendments relative to energy research into renewable accounts. And would point out there has been reference about the care that the subcommittee has taken as far as drafting this legislation. Stated in the committee report language relative to solar that the committee encourages the department to include in its efforts disruptive solar energy utilization technologies, fabrication methods that yield ultra-low-cost solar cells, technology for ultra-high efficiency solar cells, and technologies designed to simulate the operation of solar cells and other methods to yield advanced sciences. The committee also recommended that no funding for solar demonstration zone projects, as the department has adequate facilities at its existing laboratories, so they certainly recognize they did not want money expended in that area. The committee also indicated in its report that it is aware of the significant cost and efficiency advantages solar films can provide to thin film and crystalline silicon modules, and we encourage the department to expand the funding of solar film research and development. So again, the monies that are provided, which are very tight, are also very thoughtfully put forth with very directive language by the committee, and for that reason I do oppose the gentleman's amendment and would yield back my time.
New York. I'm sorry, California.
California. Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in opposition to this amendment. We clearly have to move away from fossil fuels. In order to do so, we need to understand the other opportunities that are available to us. Indeed, solar has been around for a long time, but also in the last decade to 15 years, there's been extraordinary increases in the efficiencies of the solar systems. And they continue to increase. This is not the time for us to back away from the future. It's time for us to move aggressively forward, providing the research, providing the incentives to move to a new source of energy. Now, if you want to continue to pollute the atmosphere, then stay with coal. If you want to continue to be indebted to the petro-dictators of the world, then stay with oil. But we need to move away from that. And this money, in this particular part of the bill, provides us with the opportunity to seize the next generation of power, and that is the sun. Yes, the sun's been around a long time, warming us and providing us with what we need to survive. We need to use it more effectively and efficiently, and that's what this money allows us to do. Removing the $154 million is exactly the wrong thing to do. I oppose the amendment.
Yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
To oppose this amendment, but to agree with the gentleman's concern about the use of the taxpayer dollar. In this account, which we've been debating for perhaps an hour and a half, I don't think any program has probably had a larger cut than the solar program, perhaps for the very reasons the gentleman raises there. The solar technologies have been around for a long time. We have a fairly viable public sector, but I do think we still need, within the Department of Energy, people in the Department of Energy that can put together and provide some degree of expertise and advice to a variety of different entrepreneurs. So I reluctantly oppose the amendment, but certainly know that his heart and is in the right place. And yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment by the gentleman from offered by the gentleman from California. All those in favor say aye. All opposed say no. And the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, on that, I'd ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment by the gentleman from California will be postponed. The clerk will read.
Page 23, line 11. Electricity delivery and energy reliability, $139,496,000. Nuclear energy, $733,633,000.
What purpose, gentleman from California, rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment, or read the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Schiff of California. Page 24, line 6, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $10 million, increased by $10 million.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is very simple. Of the $733 million appropriated in this bill for nuclear energy research at the Department of Energy, it separates out $10 million to spend on the cooperative effort with NASA to restart plutonium production, that is plutonium-238. Advancing the state of nuclear energy technology was the initial mission of the Department of Energy, and it was hugely successful, developing technologies now used in power plants, submarines, and deep space missions. This lax focus is now one of the smallest. DOE spends about $40 million a year building plutonium-238 radioisotope thermal generators, RTGs, for NASA and for national security purposes. This program began in the 50s. RTGs flew on all of the Apollo missions, and many times since. In deep space, RTGs are often the only possible source of power. Unfortunately, in the early 90s, the U.S. shut down plutonium-238 production, and since then, the Department of Energy has been using stockpiled material and material purchased from Russia to build these devices. Recently, though, Russia refused to continue that relationship, and our supply of plutonium-238 is almost exhausted. There are no other viable ways to provide this power, so the U.S. must restart production to allow any deep space or national security uses to continue. This project has been requested in the last 3 budget requests under the Bush and Obama administrations. Over the course of 5 years, the total cost of the project is estimated at $75 to $90 million. By agreement between the agencies, the project would be equally funded between NASA and DOE. As NASA has the largest need for the power and DOE has the expertise and would build and maintain the facility. The $10 million requested this year in the NASA budget was included in the CJS bill making its way through the Appropriations Committee. This 50-50 cost share is consistent
with the decades-long history of the RTG program, in which NASA has paid for each RTG produced for its purposes, and DOE has paid for the infrastructure required. In the context of the nuclear energy research budget, which in fact receives a modest increase in this bill, this is a very small project, but it would have an outsized influence on our ability to do the kind of space exploration that no one else in the world can. It may also provide an opportunity for national security agencies to pursue important projects that would otherwise not be available. I hope that every member can support this amendment so that we can continue the long history of space exploration for which this nation is known around the world. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to to oppose the gentleman's amendment, but let me thank him for his historical perspective of the department and its initial responsibility, and for his own deep knowledge, which he shared with many of us in the House, of its necessity in terms of space exploration. The gentleman's amendment increases funding for the plutonium-238 production restart project, as it's called. To do so, funding for other valuable nuclear energy activities would have to be cut, including the advanced reactor concept research, fuel cell development, and promising avenues like small modular reactors, licensing, and research. The administration has proposed this new project for several years in order to increase domestic supplies of plutonium-238. The vast majority of this material, as Mr. Schiff has said, would be used by NASA for in-space power supplies, and only a small fraction would be used by the Department of Energy. Unfortunately, after the committee repeatedly expressed concerns since fiscal year 2010, the administration once again proposed in the 2012 budget request for the Department of Energy to share a full half of the project's financial cost. The administration has neither altered its stance nor addressed or even acknowledged the committee's concern about this disproportionate sharing. The funding plans in the budget request and the amendment simply don't make sense, particularly given the other critical priorities in our bill. As we've expressed for 2 years, the administration must develop a more sensible plan. Thereby, I oppose the amendment and urge members to do likewise.
Yields back.
Yield back.
The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Holt, for what purpose do you rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I would like to make a brief comment in support of the gentleman's amendment. As he said, and as I would like to reiterate, there is a class of space exploration that cannot be carried out without these RTGs. Our domestic supply is unreliable at best, essentially non-existent, and it takes a while to regenerate that. I strongly support the gentleman's move to restart that program so that we could have a reliable domestic program for deep space exploration that cannot be conducted anyway with other energy sources. And I think it is a reasonable amendment. It's not overstated, and I would urge its adoption. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Indiana.
Chair, move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Appreciate the recognition and rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment. I certainly appreciate, again, his seriousness in offering it. I appreciate what he wants to accomplish, but the history of this issue has been discussed by a number of speakers. The fact is there have been presidents of both parties that have made this recommendation over the last 3 years. There has been directive language by this committee under the direction of both political parties over the last 3 years. And the point is there is a benefit to another agency in the government outside the Department of Energy. They ought to pick up a reasonable cost. There ought to be an agreement. And until that is done, would respectfully, with all respect, rise to oppose the gentleman's amendment and would yield back my time.
Yields back. The question is on the amendment by the gentleman offered by the gentleman from California. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. No. Pin the chairs. The ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, on that I request the yeas and nays.
Gentleman from California. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. Gentleman from California.
Have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Garamendi of California. Page 24, line 6, after the dollar amount, insert increase by $20 million. Page 24, line 18, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $20 million.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from Indiana.
I reserve a point of order on the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman reserves point of order. Gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. This particular section provides $700 million plus for nuclear power research of various kinds. The chairman spoke to this issue a few moments ago. The purpose of my amendment is to carve out of that $700+ million a sum of $20 million to restart America's program on recycling spent nuclear fuel. We currently call this spent nuclear fuel a waste, when in fact it still possesses about 97% of the energy that was originally in the uranium and then processed once through the light water reactors. The purpose of the amendment is to restart. In the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, America undertook a program to close the nuclear fuel cycle. That was abandoned in 1994 after a successful effort to recycle and to use that energy that is found in the nuclear fuel. Unfortunately, now the spent nuclear fuel, which we call a waste product, is sitting at every reactor in the United States and mostly around the world, creating a significant hazard. We only need to think about Fukushima's little swimming pool that went dry and the meltdown that occurred at that point. We need to recycle and completely use, or as much as possible, completely use the energy in these spent nuclear fuel pools. If we do so, we can do it in a way that significantly reduces the hazard, significantly reduces the longevity of the problem from some 200,000 to some 300 years, and create an enormous energy opportunity. This is a beginning. There's a long path ahead of us, and we have to start on this immediately. And that's the purpose of this. Unfortunately, is going to be ruled out of order. However, in the future, as we move forward, I would hope that the committee and this House and the Senate deem fit to put this kind of program back into action. With that, I yield back my time.
The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I continue to reserve my point of order.
The point of order is reserved.
And to strike the last word, to speak briefly on the bill.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise to oppose the amendment, but and I will seek to insist on my point of order just to make a few comments. The gentleman's amendment prescribes a path forward for the back end of the nuclear energy fuel cycle by directing the Department of Energy to develop a specific type of reprocessing plan and facility, the integral fast reactor. Let me say I appreciate our colleagues from California's passion for moving forward our nation's strategy for handling spent nuclear fuel, and I want to thank him for the many times he approached me on this issue. I and many of my colleagues share the gentleman's concerns, and I have repeatedly pushed the administration to move forward at least one piece of the solution, which is the Yucca Mountain repository. There is, however, ongoing debate about the future of the back end of our nation's fuel cycle. There are many approaches, including open, closed, and modified fuel cycles. Each of these approaches, some of which utilize reprocessing facilities, are far from straightforward and can be accomplished using a variety of competing technologies. While I appreciate my colleagues' desire to move the nation forward, we must carefully evaluate these highly technical issues to address the economic, safety, and non-proliferation impacts that accompany any fuel cycle option. The gentleman's amendment chooses one winning technology, and I believe it deserves more careful evaluation before moving forward. And I insist on my point of order.
You want to speak on the point of order? Gentleman state his point of order, excuse me. Would gentleman state his point of order, please?
Mr. Chairman, the amendment proposes to amend portions of the bill not yet read. The amendment may not be considered en bloc under Clause 2F of Rule 21 because of outlays in the bill. I ask for a ruling from the chair.
Does anyone wish to speak on the
I do wish to speak on the point of order.
California is recognized.
I think the point of order is out of order. In fact, the issue before us is of utmost importance to this nation and indeed to the world. As more and more light water reactors are built, the problem of spent fuel continues to mount and creates hazards. The United States did, in fact, figure out how to close the nuclear fuel cycle. Getting to that point,
The gentleman needs to speak to the point of order.
I'm working towards that.
Well, the gentleman needs to speak to the point of order.
The point of order that I would wish to speak to, I will yield back my time and take up the subject later. Thank you.
The chair is prepared to yield. To be considered en bloc pursuant to Clause 2F of Rule 21, an amendment must not propose to increase the levels of budget authority or outlays in the bill. Because the amendment offered by the gentleman from California proposes a net increase in the level of outlays in the bill, as argued by the chair of the Subcommittee on Appropriations, it may not avail itself of Clause 2F to address portions of the bill not yet read. Clerk will read.
Page 24, line 7. Fossil energy research and development, $476,993,000.
The gentleman from California.
Yeah, this amendment is to put America.
Does the gentleman have an amendment to the desk?
I do.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Garamendi of California. Page 24, line 18. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $450 million. Page 28, line 23. After the dollar amount, insert increased by $450 million.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
This amendment would transfer $450 million from the fossil fuel research account to ARPA-E. The reason for the amendment is that we have to move off of the 19th century fuel, that is coal and oil, and move to future energy sources, one of which I talked about a few moments ago, that is the nuclear. The other energy sources are out there. We've discussed in this floor here over the last hour the issue of solar. There are fuels, advanced biofuels. There are also wind, solar, wave, geothermal. All of these are being advanced at this time by the ARPA-E program within the Department of Energy. That's where the future is. Now, we can make a choice here about staying with the past and try to figure out how to create clean coal, which is probably the oxymoron of the century, or we can simply shift our resources to look at other energy sources. And that's what we have to do. The purpose of this amendment is to do that, is to shift $450 million into ARPA-E so that we can look for the energy systems of the future, providing the support that they need, both in the research and in the early development of those resources. There's been much success in this area. There have been numerous research programs that have been done not only at the Department of Energy facilities but at universities around this country that have taken advantage of the ARPA-E program. It is modeled after the very successful and very long-lasting Department of Defense ARPA program. And it works. We've actually seen major scientific breakthroughs that have occurred as a result of the funding from the ARPA-E program. Modest as it was, if this amendment were to be adopted, it would be a very big program, one that has the potential of advancing this nation's future and freeing us, in the case of oil, from the petrodictators of the world, and also, in the case of coal, from the extraordinary problems that coal brings to the environment and to communities throughout this nation. I understand the coal industry and their desire to continue to dig for coal. But we know that at some point we're going to have to move away into the future, and that's what this amendment would attempt to accomplish. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. First, the gentleman from Indiana rise. Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
With all respect, I do rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment. I appreciate his comments about ARPA-E, appreciate the purpose behind its creation, and would certainly acknowledge that it would appear at ARPA-E there is a new culture, if you would, at that element of the Department of Energy to move projects along and to have a conclusion to research. As I indicated in my opening remarks in general debate on this bill, I wish the Department of Energy had brought the same vigor and that same commitment that they had to ARPA-E to existing programs at the Department of Energy. Because my concern is at some point in time we have too many programs that are going to solve the problem and we're tripping over each other. At this point we have 46 Energy Frontier Research Centers, and there's a request to add 3 to 8 more. We have a new administration, and it is not unique to the Obama administration that at the Department of Energy we need, as I would characterize it, a new silver ball to chase around. We need new hubs so that people can talk to each other about critical research. At this point in time, there are 3 hubs in place, as I understand that, for about 18 months. There are 2 more called for in this bill, totaling 5. We need a bioenergy research center. There are now 3 in the United States, 1 in Berkeley, California, 1 in Madison, Wisconsin, and 1 in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. We also need defined research being done at the Joint Genome Institute that was established in 1997 under President II removed. I, at this point in time, would like to make sure that ARPA-E works over a longer term as advertised, and that as advertised, the Department takes that culture that is being developed at ARPA-E and to infuse it into these other programs and to show the Congress of the United States there is communication between these numerous programs before we provide any additional monies over and above those called for in the bill. So again, very respectfully, would oppose the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, moves to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
And to oppose the amendment, but to also associate myself with the ranking member's comments on ARPA-E, which I'm supportive of. Of course, our colleague's amendment would add funding to ARPA-E, which receives, I think, $100 million, I know, in our bill. But the way he would do it would be virtually to eliminate funding for the fossil energy research and development program, I think causing excessive job losses, and I think the program makes major contributions. Of course, we can't forget that fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, generate about 70% of our nation's electricity. ARPA-E may someday generate a much greater percentage than perhaps it potentially does today, but we're a long way from there. And so I oppose the gentleman's amendment, and certainly the source using the fossil fuels account for this additional money that he suggests, and yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. Pin the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Gentleman from California.
For recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. From New Jersey.
I move that the committee now rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee rise. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Mr. Chairman.
H.R. 2354 directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
Chair of the Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 2354 and has come to no resolution thereon. The Chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leaves of absence requested for Mr. Danny Davis of Illinois for today and Ms. Corrine Brown of Florida.
Without objection, the requests are granted.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the House adjourn.
Question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for the morning hour debate.
Today in the House, members continued work on amendments to the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill for FY 2012. Votes on the measure continue tomorrow.